This survey was aimed at both libraries who had already finished their linked open data publication project, as well as for libraries who were in the planning stages of a project. And we conducted the survey in 2019 and released this quite compact version of or report on the results of the survey. But yeah, one of the sort of the key points from the surveys and really when it comes to linked data project is that like my cats, they are diverse in scope, in character, and that means that there are many approaches to how linked data is published, and those approaches, they create their challenges for interoperability, which we'll get back to later. And another sort of key thing that we found was that the most notable expense is definitely the human labor. That the tools and what you need for linked data publication, they are often free or at least not very expensive compared to the workload for the people that make the project happen. And we didn't want to, and it would have been impossible to create a guide that's very like strict and ironclad in that first you must do this and then you must do this and finally this and choose exactly these vocabularies and these tools and whatever, because every project is different and there are no correct answers. So what we did instead was to create a guide that aims to help in sort of structuring the project or finding out the things that need to be decided and what are the considerations that need to be had. So more of a project planning guide in a sense. And another consideration was that we didn't want to make a very technical guide. Because linked data is it's often seen as a very, very technical thing that's more aimed at the people who code and the technical experts. But there is a great need in linked data publication for other sorts of skill sets as well. So the librarian side of things. So that was something that we hope to sort of emphasize. We came up with a model that has 6 steps in it, which is coincidentally the same amount of steps that were in the work previous workshop. With the data modeling, but these are different 6 steps. So I will go through each of the steps one by one, but they are planning the publication process, then choosing and curating the dataset, then 3 steps about data modeling, so identifying the resources to link to, applying a model, element sets, and value vocabularies, and then the actual data conversion. And as the final 6th step, making and keeping data available and up to date, which is naturally very important, and it's also a step that will keep on going for into the future. And one thing worth noting about these steps is that they aren't strictly linearly chronological, so you are supposed to sort of go between them and make new and more informed decisions when you find out when you find out new things about the project in future steps. So it isn't necessarily just like a straight line, and this is very true in the data modeling segment. So the steps 3, 4, and 5 are very intertwined. So first of all, step 1, planning the publication process. So this is kind of a meta step in the sense that it entails all the other steps. So you basically plan all the steps in this one. So there is naturally the normal project planning, things like setting up milestones and estimating workloads and resources needed and such. But one of the sort of the key points here is well, as I mentioned, the human labor is the most important expense, and here you sort of need to consider that you need the technical expertise, but you also need the domain expertise for whatever you are going to be publishing. And here it's sort of important to note that this publication process, it won't be just like a technical process, that it will involve the librarian side of things, as I mentioned. Then step 2, and maybe the most important step, is choosing and curating the dataset. So as I mentioned, there are tons of variables when it comes to this. So what is the dataset that you are publishing? Is it your library's whole bibliographic data? Is it like a subject vocabulary or an authority record? Or is it like a specific collection and everything related to that one? So that really sort of sets the tone for the whole project. And once you have that figured out, then you need to consider the characteristics that the dataset has. How big is it? How unique is it? Is it of high quality? Who owns it? Are you allowed to even publish it? Do you need to ask for a permission somewhere? And a point on the uniqueness, that's worth making here, is that naturally, if your dataset is very unique, that you cannot have it from anywhere else, that will make it more interesting for the end users. But even datasets that have been already published somewhere else can be worth it to convert to linked data, simply because if you are using it, if it's your own data, then once it is in linked format, it might be easier to make it interoperable with the datasets that others have published, and you can use this interoperability to enrich your own dataset and naturally the other datasets as well. So don't be too put off by the question on how unique your dataset is. Then the second part in this step 2 is choosing in choosing and curating the dataset is the curation part. So basically cleaning up the data, which involves, well, fixing errors and inconsistencies and formatting, removing white spaces and such, and correcting format differences and so on. And when you do all of these cleanup things to the dataset, you sort of need to first decide whether you do it to the original data, to the master dataset, or whether you copy it and then do these procedures to the copy of the dataset. And this is actually quite a fundamental question, in the sense that if you do it for the copy, then your process needs to be quite automated, because you don't want to repeat the manual labor. So it will sort of change the way that you can do things. because usually, well, if your data set is something that isn't updated, then I suppose that you can do it like a one and done sort of deal. But most of the time, it's something that's a living data set that gets updated, and then you need to sort of consider that you might need to repeat this whole process. And naturally, remembering to document things is always important. Usually not the most exciting part of work, but but quite important, and especially when you deal with data and these sorts of mass conversions. Then in step 3, you need to identify the resources to link to. So, well, links are naturally a core part of linked data, and having links to outside sources means better interoperability and new information that you can get from there to your data. This is what we dealt with in the workshop just moments ago. And very much related to this is the question of reconciliation, which basically means that if you have local values in the dataset, you could replace them with more well-known values from a controlled vocabulary. So that, for example, if your data descriptive metadata includes subject or information about the subject of publication, for example, if you have used, for example, like just strings or some your own controlled vocabulary, you might wish to do some reconciliation and use some more well-known vocabulary, like, well, for example, Wikidata or the Library of Congress subject headings or something like that. And we include some suggestions in the guide on where you should or where you could link to. But of course, this is very much dependent on the specifics of the data that you are publishing. Then we get to step 4, applying a model, element sets, and value vocabularies. And this is well, first of all, I didn't have a picture of my cats making a mess, so I had to resort to my excellent artistic ability. But this is arguably the step that might lead to the biggest lack of interoperability. There aren't libraries have been publishing their data as linked open data quite a bit, but there are lots of different approaches, and there are like several layers where you can choose differently. So there's the actual bibliographic models, RDA, BibFrame. Then there are the element sets. Again, RDA and BibFrame have those as well, but then there's SCOS and FOF and Dublin Core and schema.org, things that were discussed in the workshop. And then there are the value vocabularies, such as Library of Congress subject headings and MESH and ISNI and VIAF and GNMs and so on. So there is a massive amount of choice that you can make here, and whatever you choose, it will make it more interoperable with some data sets and less interoperable with others. Yeah, there are no correct answers to this one either, but this is something that most likely needs quite a bit of research and consideration once you get to this step. And we have in the guide, it has some suggestions, but again, there are no correct answers. So then you get to a more straightforward step 5, converting the data. There are lots of tools that are available, and it really doesn't matter much. We suggest going with something that you are the most comfortable with. But an important part is that you need a mapping from the original format of the data to the new one. So whatever choices you have made in the previous steps, you need this mapping. And as we know, the MARC format can contain a lot of information, and it can be somewhat convoluted depending on the data. The mapping can be very simple, or it can be that if this MARC subfield has this value, then the value from this field is a modifier for the value from that field, and then you need someone with lots of expertise with the format to sort of make sense of this for the person doing the coding if it isn't the same person naturally. So here again, the sort of the librarian expertise and the technical staff needs to work together. And also a note on identifiers, as was I'll keep this short because it was already very well discussed in the workshop. But just to note that there are lots of places where you need identifiers when you are publishing linked data, and this is something that often gets a bit overlooked, and it might seem simple, and it often is simple, but there are certainly quite a few decisions that need to be made, and it's quite key to the usability of your data in the end. Then we get to step 6. So making and keeping data available and up to date. So first of all, you will need to decide on how you serve the data. Do you have it just as a file that can be downloaded as like an RDF file in some format, or do you set up an API or a Sparkle endpoint? Sparkle is a query language for RDF for linked data, and it allows for the user to make very powerful queries to the data. So it can be super useful, but with great power comes great responsibility, as Spider-Man says. So there are some pitfalls or things that you need to consider when setting up a Sparkle endpoint. Naturally, you also need a license for your data. Creative Commons is the standard here, but other open licenses are also possible. The CC0 is the most permissible and the one that is recommended the most. Another one that is used quite widely is the CC BY, which means that the user needs to name the source of the data. That's good when the user is expected to use the whole data set. But if the data set is such that the user is likely to just pick like small parts of it, then it becomes a bit more cumbersome to sort of satisfy the requirement of naming there. So take that into account when choosing the license. And then you, of course, need to make the world aware of your data. You might have your own data catalog. Those are quite popular with libraries these days, and there are lots of advice on how to set one up, and you should also naturally document the data. There are also places that publish or collect linked data. Data sets from different domains, so those are also good to keep in mind. And finally, and very importantly, is the question on updating your data. So this is something that really needs to be considered in the planning stages of the project. That usually if you publish something as linked data, you will need to consider how you keep it up to date, and that will probably cause some workload that is future workload that will be that should be considered. So yeah, that's basically it. Everything depends on the data and the project. Is sort of the key takeaway here. There are naturally lots of other resources outside of this guide, and we link to some, mention some in the guide. But also you shouldn't be afraid to ask for help. As mentioned, lots of libraries have been publishing their data in linked and open format, and they are often happy to help, share lessons learned and suggestions and such. And as the last point, the success might be difficult to measure. This is something that is sort of intrinsic to open data, that if you offer your data openly, then the user doesn't need to let you know that they are using it, and it often makes it difficult to track the sort of the success or how much your data is used and where. And another possible benefit is that when you make your data more interoperable, it might help in integrations down the years, but that's something that also takes quite a while to bear fruit. So the measurements aren't very easy, which of course makes it somewhat more difficult to sort of decide on the resources and whether it's worth it. So yeah, take that into account when planning. But that's about it. I seem to be kind of in the allotted time. So I wish to thank you very much, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.